Welcome to Beyond the Outback. I'm Emily, your American host who's constantly fascinated by all things Australia.
And I'm Tom, your resident Aussie, who's here to hopefully explain why we do things the way we do down under.
Today we're diving into something I've been genuinely curious about from afar: Australian houses. As someone who's thinking about potentially visiting Australia someday, I have to say, from what I've seen in photos and videos, they are so different from what I'm used to back in the States. Like, sometimes I'll be looking at Australian neighborhood photos online and I'm thinking, did someone just throw a bunch of different architectural styles in a blender?
Yeah, that's actually not a bad way to put it. Australia's got this interesting thing where we don't really have a single architectural identity like some countries do.
Right, exactly. Like in America, you can drive through a New England town and everything has that colonial feel. Or you go to California and there's that Spanish colonial revival thing going on.
Exactly. But here, it's like, well, think about it this way. Australia's a pretty young country in terms of European settlement, right? We're only talking about 250-ish years, and during that time, we've had waves of different influences coming through. You've got your early colonial stuff, then the Victorian era when we were trying to be all proper and British.
Hmm.
Then you had the post war immigration boom when people from all over Europe and Asia started arriving, bringing their own ideas about what a home should look like. And then there's the practical side of it. You know, this country throws some pretty intense weather at you. So houses had to adapt to survive.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's like this constant evolution based on who was here and what they needed to deal with climate wise.
Yeah, and here's the thing that might surprise you. A lot of early Australian houses were actually designed by people who had never lived in this climate. Picture this, you've got British architects in the 1800s designing houses for Sydney or Melbourne, but they're basing it on what works in London or Edinburgh. Spoiler alert, that didn't always work out so well.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can imagine. So what did those early houses actually look like? Were they just completely wrong for the climate?
Well, some of them, yeah. But actually, let's talk about the older homes that did work. The weatherboard houses. These are probably the most quintessentially Australian homes, even though the style originally came from America, believe it or not.
Wait, really? From America?
Yep. The weatherboard technique, you know, those horizontal or wooden planks that overlap, that came from North America originally, but Aussies adapted it and made it their own. So you've got these beautiful old weatherboard houses, especially in places like Melbourne and the inner suburbs of Sydney. They're usually painted in these gorgeous heritage colours: deep greens, creams, terracotta reds.
Oh, I love those. They have such character, but I notice they often have these really wide verandas.
Yes, now that's the Australian adaptation kicking in. Those verandas, that's pure Australian innovation right there. See, early settlers quickly figured out that if you're going to survive an Australian summer, you need shade and lots of it. So these verandas wrap around the house, sometimes on two or three sides, creating this beautiful outdoor living space that's protected from sun and rain. My mate lives in one of these old weatherboards in Paddington in Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that veranda is like an extra room. He's got his morning coffee out there, does work calls, has dinner parties. It's brilliant. You don't get that kind of outdoor living integration in a lot of other countries because the climate just doesn't allow for it year round.
That's so true. And those weatherboard houses, they seem to breathe better too, if that makes sense. Like they don't feel stuffy the way some modern houses can.
Oh, you've hit on something really important there. Those old weatherboard houses were designed for natural ventilation. High ceilings, we're talking 10, 11, 12 feet high, which lets hot air rise and escape. Windows on opposite sides of rooms to create cross breezes. And here's the clever bit: a lot of them are raised off the ground on stumps.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. Why is that?
A few reasons, actually. First, it gets the house up off the ground for better airflow underneath, keeps things cooler, and prevents moisture buildup. Second, it's great for pest control, harder for termites and other critters to get into your house. And third, it makes the house more flood resistant, which is pretty important in a country where it can go from drought to deluge pretty quickly. Plus, it gives you storage space underneath.
That's so practical. But then I'm also seeing all these brick houses everywhere. Those seem completely different from the weatherboard ones. What's the story there?
Ah, the great Australian brick veneer house. Yeah, this is where we get into the more modern era of Australian housing. So, post World War II, There was this huge housing boom. Returning servicemen needed homes, immigration was bringing in lots of new families, and there was this push to build houses quickly and affordably. Enter the brick veneer house.
Okay, so what exactly is brick veneer? Because I have to admit, I thought all those brick houses were just solid brick.
Ha! No, that's a common misconception. Brick veneer is basically a timber frame house with a single layer of bricks on the outside for cladding. So you've got your standard wood frame construction, but instead of weatherboards or siding, you stick bricks on the outside. It looks like a solid brick house, but it's not.
Interesting. So why brick instead of continuing with weatherboard?
Well, a few reasons. First, brick is incredibly durable in the Australian climate. It handles heat, UV radiation, and weather extremes really well without needing much maintenance. Weatherboard houses need repainting every few years. Brick houses, not so much. Second, there was this cultural thing happening where brick was seen as more prestigious, more permanent. Like, we've made it, we can afford a brick house.
Right, that makes sense.
And third, Australia had really good clay deposits for brick making, so it was a relatively cheap building material. Plus, and this is important, brick provides excellent thermal mass. During the day, those bricks absorb heat. Then at night, when it cools down, they slowly release that heat back out. It's like a natural temperature regulation system.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that. So the house actually stays cooler during the day because the bricks are absorbing all that heat instead of letting it through?
Exactly. And then at night, when the outside temperature drops, those bricks slowly release that stored heat, which can actually help keep the house warmer in winter. It's pretty clever, really. Now, the downside is that if you have a really extreme heat wave, those bricks can get super hot and take ages to cool down again. But generally speaking, it's a good system for the Australian climate.
That's fascinating. And I have to ask about the colors because, in America we have a lot of red brick, but here I see so much more variety. Like there's this cream colored brick that seems really popular.
Oh, yeah, the cream brick. That became huge in the 70s and 80s. It's actually pretty smart from a climate perspective because lighter colours reflect more heat than darker colours. Red brick looks great, but it absorbs a lot of heat. Cream brick reflects more of that Australian sun back away from the house, keeping things cooler inside.
Ah, so it's functional, not just aesthetic.
Yep. Though I have to say, there was probably a bit of fashion involved too. The cream brick thing was very much the style for suburban developments in that era. You'll notice that a lot of those houses also have these big picture windows facing the street, usually with some kind of decorative brickwork around them.
Yes. And the front gardens, they're so different from American front yards. Like there's often no fence, but then sometimes there's this low brick wall or hedge.
You're getting into the classic Australian approach to property boundaries and privacy, which is really interesting. So, a lot of Australian suburban houses do have that open front yard concept, especially in the more established areas. It creates this sense of community openness, right? But then you'll often see a side fence or back fence that's quite high for privacy.
Right, exactly. It's like, hey, we're friendly and welcoming from the front, but our backyard is our private space.
That's actually a perfect way to put it. And speaking of backyards, this is where Australian houses really show their personality. The backyard is absolutely sacred in Australian culture. I mean, this is where the barbecue lives, where the kids play, where you hang your washing.
Oh, the hills hoist. Those rotating clotheslines are everywhere.
The hills hoist. Yes! That's like the most Australian invention ever. But seriously, the backyard culture here is huge. Even in dense urban areas, people will sacrifice indoor space to have a decent backyard. You'll see these tiny inner city houses that have these surprisingly large outdoor spaces. And it makes sense, right? With the climate we have, you can use your outdoor space almost year round.
That's so different from what I grew up with. Like in the Northeast US, your backyard is basically unusable for several months of the year because it's too cold or there's snow everywhere.
Exactly. Here, even in winter, in most parts of Australia, you can still have a barbecue, sit outside with a jumper on, let the kids run around. So the backyard becomes like an extension of the house. A lot of Australian houses have this indoor-outdoor flow thing happening. Big sliding doors or French doors that open right onto a patio or deck.
Yes. And that brings me to something I've really noticed about the inside of Australian houses. They feel so much more open than American houses. Like everything seems to flow together.
Oh, you've picked up on the open plan thing? Yeah, this became really popular in Australia from about the 80s onwards, but it's actually rooted in practical concerns. See, if you've got smaller rooms with lots of walls, air can't circulate as well. Open plan means better airflow, which means cooler houses in summer. Plus, it makes spaces feel bigger, which is important when you're trying to fit a family into what might not be a huge floor plan.
Right. And it's perfect for that indoor-outdoor living thing too, because you can have the kitchen, dining, and living room all connected, and then it all opens out to the backyard.
Exactly. And there's a social aspect to it too. Australian culture is pretty social, right? We like having people over, throwing barbecues, having a few drinks with mates. Open plan means the person cooking can still chat with everyone else. And when the doors are open to the backyard, you've got this seamless flow between inside and outside entertaining spaces. It's brilliant for parties.
I love that. But I have to ask about air conditioning because with all this talk about heat and climate adaptation, I'm curious how that factors into modern Australian homes.
Oh man, air conditioning. This is where things get interesting. So, for a long time, Australian houses relied on those passive cooling strategies we talked about: high ceilings, cross ventilation, verandas, thermal mass. But as summer temperatures have gotten more extreme, and as people's expectations for comfort have changed, air conditioning has become pretty standard.
Right, and I notice a lot of houses have those split system units on the walls instead of central air like we have in the US.
Yeah, that's partly because a lot of Australian houses weren't originally built with ducted air conditioning in mind. Retrofitting central air into an existing house is expensive and complicated. Split systems are much easier to install. You just need to run a line between the indoor and outdoor units. Plus, they're more energy efficient because you can cool just the rooms you're using instead of the whole house.
That makes so much sense. And what about heating? Because I know it does get cold in parts of Australia, even though the stereotype is that it's always hot.
Oh, great question. Yeah, Melbourne, Canberra, parts of Sydney, Adelaide, they definitely get proper cold winters. But here's the thing: for the longest time, Australian houses were really poorly designed for heating. We were so focused on keeping cool that we kind of forgot about keeping warm. A lot of older houses have minimal insulation, single pane windows, gaps around doors. They're freezing in winter.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. My parents' place in Melbourne, built in the 70s, used to be absolutely arctic in winter. No insulation in the walls, gaps you could stick your finger through around the windows. Dad used to joke that it was warmer outside than inside on winter mornings. They've since renovated and added proper insulation, double glazing, all that good stuff. But for decades, they just lived with it.
So what did people do for heating back then?
Mostly just heated the room you were in. Gas heaters, electric bar heaters, maybe a fireplace if you were lucky. The whole concept of heating the entire house was pretty foreign. You'd have your one warm room where everyone congregated, and the rest of the house would be freezing. It's only really in the last 20 to 30 years that whole house heating has become more common.
Wow, that's so different from what I'm used to. But speaking of recent changes, I have to ask about housing prices because that seems to be a huge topic here. Has the way houses are built changed because of the cost of housing?
Oh, Emily, you've hit on probably the biggest issue in Australian housing right now. Yeah, housing prices have absolutely changed how we build and live. Land is so expensive now, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, that developers are building smaller and smaller houses on smaller and smaller blocks.
Right, I've noticed some of those new subdivisions where the houses seem like they're practically touching each other.
Exactly. They call them McMansions sometimes. These big houses crammed onto tiny blocks with basically no backyard. It's completely different from the traditional Australian approach where you'd have a smaller house but a decent sized yard. Now, you might have a 4-bedroom house, but you can literally reach out your window and touch your neighbour's wall.
And that must really impact that whole outdoor living culture you were talking about.
It does, unfortunately. You'll see these new houses with tiny courtyards instead of proper backyards or maybe just a small deck. It's forcing people to rethink how they live. Some developers are trying to compensate by including more communal spaces in the development, shared parks, barbecue areas, that kind of thing. But it's not quite the same as having your own space.
That's such a big shift from what we've been talking about with traditional Australian housing design.
Yeah, it really is. And there are other changes too. Apartments and townhouses are becoming much more common in cities because that's what people can afford. The traditional detached house with a backyard is becoming a luxury item in many areas. But the interesting thing is, even in apartments, developers are trying to maintain that indoor-outdoor connection with balconies, rooftop gardens, communal courtyards.
That's actually really encouraging that they're trying to preserve that aspect of Australian living, even in different housing formats.
Yeah, I think it shows how important that outdoor connection is to the Australian psyche, you know. Even if we have to adapt how we do it, we're still trying to maintain it. And there are some really innovative things happening too. Green walls, rooftop gardens, shared spaces that are designed for entertaining and community interaction.
This has been such a fascinating conversation, Tom. I feel like I understand so much more about why Australian houses look and feel the way they do. It's not random at all. It's this really thoughtful evolution based on climate, culture, and practicality.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what's really cool about Australian architecture. It's not just about looking pretty, it's about working with the environment and the way people actually want to live. Whether that's those old weatherboard houses with their deep verandas or modern apartments with big balconies, there's always been this focus on making the most of the climate and creating spaces where people can connect with each other and with the outdoors.
Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of Beyond the Outback. If you enjoyed learning about Australian housing with us, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Australian culture and lifestyle.
And if you have questions about Australian homes or suggestions for future episodes, drop us a comment below. We love hearing from you.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Outback.